So one of the things I wanted to have you come on and talk with us about, because we talk about insurance a lot, talk about coverages, we talk about, different industries, but a lot of times I get people that have a lot of misconceptions about insurance. And when I'm sitting down with them and I'm talking about insurance, it's almost like they don't necessarily believe me, right? They're like, you're a sales guy. You're trying to sell me something. So I thought maybe it would be a good spot to start. Like, what is it? And this isn't like us creating some sort of, union behind the scenes of insurance guys, but like, what are some of the misconceptions you see oftentimes when you're dealing with customers when it comes to insurance that people just don't quite get it?
Yeah, I think a lot of times, typically on our end of things, like as a broker and with you too, like we're there to help the client. We're there to represent them and help them understand what the coverages mean, what they might be missing out on. And so when we bring things up, it's not always like, hey, we're trying to get you to buy this extra coverage or things like that. I had one the other day. Something happened, a tree fell on someone's car. And it was one of those deals where like, hey, it's an extra, $5 a month to have rental car coverage or something like that. Right. And sure enough, their vehicle's gone. They don't have an extra vehicle because the husband has it and they're stuck and they didn't want to buy the rental car coverage. And so it's a hard conversation to have and just say, hey, these were the notes that we have in the file. This is what was said. That's why we bring it up, because in that situation, it's our job to kind of think of all those situations and make sure they're protected. I always tell people, we don't need to know what's in your bank account, but we got to have an idea where your net worth is, what your assets are like, because it's our job to help protect those in case there's a lawsuit filed against you from an accident or something like that. And so I feel like a lot of times the misconception is, they're just out to get you, to sell you something. It's something that I always have to pay for and I never use, right? Like how many times have we heard that line, right?
Oh, all the time. They're like, this is like such insurance is a ripoff. It's a scam.
Yep. Until you need it. And I think I've had 2 or 3 house fires in my career. And when you're sitting there and the fire department's there and they're putting it out and they've lost everything, it becomes very real to you. I went through, and before I got insurance, I was in a car accident in 2009. I was still a youth pastor at the time and I got sued from it. And that lawsuit carried on for 7 years because there was a minor involved. And they finally settled at the policy limits. But it was one of those deals where I went to bed every night. I was like, they're going to come after my house. They're going to come after, what are they going to come after? Right. And so until you actually need it and use it, it's one of those deals. Yeah, I can understand where they're coming from in that.
Yeah, I think that is a misconception that people have a lot, is they think it's just a ripoff. And I will say this, just to be kind of like, I don't know, fair, edgy. It is a ripoff if you never have a claim.
Yeah.
Right? Like if you think about it, I pay into insurance my entire life and I never have something happen. Yeah, it was a waste of money. I got nothing out of return.
I wish I could self-insure, right?
Right. Yeah. At that point, you're like, I should have just kept it. Yeah. But kind of like what you just described, you had a car accident, you were at fault. It was weighed on you probably for that whole 7 years.
Oh, it was brutal. It was brutal because we were at that time, like we were renting a house for my in-laws. We had kind of remodeled it. And then we were going to basically, after the remodel, we were going to buy it from them. And we we don't want to show any assets yet. So we kind of waited to do that till all that got tied up. But yeah, you kind of just live in limbo a little bit and you don't know are they going to come garnish my wages? Are they going to, and you can sit here and you can sit across from someone and you can talk about all the worst case scenarios too. And there's got to be a middle ground on some of that. And it also depends on people's risk tolerance, what they're comfortable doing and what they want to spend money on. So,
right. It is risk tolerance because insurance at its definition is a transfer of risk. I had a customer that had something similar. They were turning left. And I think I've told this story before, but they were turning left in downtown Bellingham. It was in the fall, this time of year, the sun's low in the sky. And the sun was in her eyes as she turned and she hit an old lady in a crosswalk. Thankfully, the lady did not die. But she was injured, had a broken hip, spent time in the hospital, time in rehab. When that customer called me, she was a friend of mine. She called me. She didn't ask me like, hey, how much am I paying per month for my auto insurance?
Yeah.
She said, am I going to lose our farm?
Yeah.
Right. Because like that's the real concern. the peace of mind that you're buying, the risk that you're transferring from herself of having to figure this out, hire a lawyer, pay for the claim. She instead transfers that to the insurance company. And obviously there's a cost to it. And so for the more risk you transfer, the more expensive it is, but the more peace of mind you have. And I think people forget that. Like they think we're selling them something. Really, we're just transferring risk and giving you peace of mind.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was at the Big I conference down in Bothell, late August, early September. And they had a bunch of CEOs of some of the top carriers in the state. And they were going through lawsuits. And it was interesting. There was a couple, both the people running for the insurance commissioner at the time spoke at the event. And there's just a lot of conversations around that and change because we've had Kreidler for so long in that department that there's going to be a change one way or another. And what the CEOs were saying, they said over 40% of the lawsuits in the state of Washington are actually financed by premium finance companies now, not insurance premium financing, but attorneys. So what happens is they come in and you get an ambulance chaser attorney or you get something like that. And they will come in and basically fund a certain amount of the payout up front for that client who was hit. They'll take 30% once it settles. The attorney takes 30%, and then the client walks away with 40%. And part of me just sits there and says, man, if there was actually trust between that client and their agent and realizing the agent is actually an advocate for the client.
Right.
And will walk them through this and get what they deserve and help them in that claims process. And then if you get to the end of it and you're like, I'm still coming up short on these bills or things like that, then maybe consult an attorney. But instead of just going to the attorney right away, you're losing so much money up front.
Yeah.
And I think that's where even our industry's gone. There's been such a lack of trust. And I think you see that because people have, in a lot of these bigger shops and these private equity firms, shops that have been bought, things like that, people just become a number. And I think that's a difference. That's the cool thing about, us being a brokerage, you being the farmer's guy here, and just the awesome relationship that we've had and the friendship we've been able to build of sending business back and forth. If it doesn't fit in what we're doing, or we feel like someone's paying too much within ours, hey, go talk to Andy, or hey, come talk to Dan and his team. And so that's where having that local agent that still knows you, runs into you at school or church or Bender Fields or whatever it might be. There's a lot of, I think, wisdom in having that person opposed to just going online. Over 70%, 80% of people still shop online for insurance, but it's something like around 65% say they still want someone to be able to pick up the phone and call and say, what do I do?
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. Because I think oftentimes people are looking for the cheapest, right? Like that's what you think when I talk to someone about insurance, like, what is your goal here? What are you wanting to accomplish? And they're just like, well, I want to save money.
15% and
right.
15 minutes from the Geico.
Exactly. Geico has spent a lot of money preaching that, right?
Well, it's like $2 to $3 billion a year they spend on advertising.
They spend more money. It's funny because they're like, we cut out the middleman. What happened to the middleman? It's like, well, you just paid the TV. The middleman is the TV. But they spend a lot of money to just pound price. And they're not the only ones. There's a lot of companies out there that are just talking about price savings. And there's value to like, hey, you got to make a budget. I get that. But to your point, when something goes wrong, who are you going to talk to? Are you dealing with a call center that, like say whatever I have to say to get you off the phone because I'm never going to have to talk to you again. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I don't see you at Safeway when I'm shopping. Right. Yeah. So you're in the community. I'm in the community. Small business owners that are in the community and are part of the community care about reputation. We care about doing the right things for the right reasons. And so I think that it matters when something goes wrong. And again, it's just kind of the same concept. If nothing ever happens, sure, it doesn't matter. But eventually you're going to have a major insurance incident. And when you do, being able to call an agent to walk through that process night and day versus an 800 number who now you do have to hire a lawyer because you don't know how to navigate that claims process And then you do lose a lot of money.
Yeah.
Because I tell my customers the same thing. I'm like, if you feel at the end of the day, after the dust settles and you get offered a settlement, if you feel like we're cutting you out by more than 10%, because there's always going to be a disagreement. Like I'm always going to want more than what I'm getting.
There's that as a client, and I've been through it too. Like there's that emotional attachment to something,
right?
Whether it's a house, a vehicle, something, right?
Right.
He's like, I deserve a little more than this, right? But
yeah. So if I have that, like if I'm within 10%, I'm probably not going to get anything more by hiring a lawyer because they're going to take 30 at least, right? So if you feel like if someone's lowballing you, you're getting half of what you should get, then absolutely hire a lawyer. And there's some companies that unfortunately you will have to hire a lawyer because their whole goal is to not pay.
I can think of 2 or 3 right off the top of my head.
We won't name them for obvious reasons, but and typically most of them are companies that you're not dealing with local agents.
Nope, it's a lot of online stuff
because they don't care. They don't care about your community. They don't care about you. They're trying to make money, and you are, to some degree, you get what you pay for. If the only thing you're concerned about is the cheapest insurance possible, don't be surprised when you have a claim that you have problems.
And I think too, the other thing is, when you make decisions, it's interesting. I have 3 kids and they're all getting older and they can kind of watch themselves now if we go out for dinner or something like that, my wife and I. But when you're younger, you're pretty selective, especially with that first kid. You're like, who's watching my kid, right? Yep. Who's, I still remember like walking into church. Did you put hand sanitizer on? By Blake, we're just like, whatever. You hold the kid. But you're really selective in who watches your kids, right? Because that's your responsibility. That's your pride and joy. And I think it should be that way in the relationships that we have with the vendors that we use on the personal side, right? Like, so my grandpa always said to me, he was in business for a long time. He owned a CarQuest store in Illinois. And when I first got into business, he said, Daniel, you need to have 3 things that are critical. He goes, in your life, he goes, and this isn't just in business, but this is just all around. He said, number 1, you got to have a really good attorney. Because number 2, you need to have a good accountant. And number 3, you surround yourself with people with extremely high integrity that will have your back. And also he goes, and here's another kicker, find people that are smarter than you and don't be threatened by them. And I feel like that has gone a long way just in life. And so I take that now and I say, okay, who's the person that I want to have a relationship with? Right. So who's the person that I'm going to buy vehicles from? Who's the person that's going to do my contracting work? Who's the all of those things down the road. And I want to work with people that I can look in the eye and shake their hand. And to me, their word and their handshake still means something. And even if, something goes wrong, we're going to make it right, and you just don't get that as much anymore.
No, you don't. You get a lot of blame shifting and finger pointing. I think that's a really valid thing to think about in general. Your word is your bond, and you do something because you said you would. There's an older agent that I know. He's not in this state, but he said, like, when we make a promise, we follow through on it. And he said I had to have a really hard conversation with my wife one day. He said, because somebody called in and they'd asked about coverage on a renter's insurance policy, and my staff person shot me a Google chat or whatever, and I off the cuff replied. And so they told the customer this was how it would work. And as you would, lo and behold, something happens, there's a claim, and that's not how the policy was written.
Yeah.
He said, but I had told them that was. He said, so I wrote him a check for $20,000 because that was the right thing to do, because I told him it was covered and it wasn't. That's on me.
And honey, we're not taking the kids on vacation this year.
We're canceling some plans this year. And that's difficult. I had something similar happen. It wasn't to that tune, but we had a bond that we were trying to do for somebody on a performance bond for a contractor. And I was like, we'll get this for you by this day. No problem. Well, it turned out that it was a problem because the bond form that the city was requiring, nobody wanted to give us the bond. And I called everybody. And this was fairly early on. And so at the end of the day, I posted the bond for the customer. I was like, we will get this bond posted for you.
Yeah.
Because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
If you give your word, you got to follow through.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important in general. And I think that's something that people, I guess when we talk about misconceptions, I think that's something people feel like insurance agents are all slimy. Like we're all used car salesmen, and not all used car salesmen are slimy either. But that's what we get. And they forget that you can trust, if you build a trusted relationship with somebody, they will save you money and help you through a claims process better than anybody else can.
And educate you on what's going on in the marketplace.
Yeah.
Because right now, I mean, I got someone in my office who's been in insurance for 39 years. She's never seen anything like the market that we're in. You know, you talk to, and it's interesting too, like on the brokerage side, I don't know about on the captive side, but I'm just seeing so many people that are getting closer to retirement age. They're like, I'm out.
Yeah.
Like, I'll just sell it for the top dollar to private equity. Well, and then all of a sudden you go there, the culture changes in the office, how they're going to interact with people. It all becomes about mitigating and minimizing your E&O exposure. And so we're not going to call clients when it downloads in the system for a late payment or they're pending cancel for non-pay, because the E&O insurance says if we do that, we have to do that with everyone. I'm just like, can't we just set up at least an automation so it syncs, so it pings them with a text message or something, like just to remind them, because it's the right thing to do.
Right.
Like, how many times have we had probably where like it's tied to a debit or a credit card, right? And the card expires and you're going through, okay, what automatic payments did I have set up on that card? Right.
Yep.
And
that's the bad part about automatic.
Is it right. And so, so it just, most of the time it's something like that where it's just simple, right? And we want to help them. But then there's all these restrictions put on agencies by our insurance.
Yep.
And so like, where's that balance between the right thing? And when you go to the big corporate firms, you're just going to be, no, this is how it's done because we're covering our backside from the legal side of things. And so I don't know, it's interesting. I love the industry because I feel like you get to really try to serve people well in something that feels like a different language sometimes. And it's an opportunity to also help kind of in a time of need for people, in a time of crisis too.
Yeah, I think you're definitely providing a huge service. You don't need insurance until something goes wrong. So there's always, anytime that someone calls us to use their insurance, it's something bad, right? Like you either have a major fire, you have a car accident, you have a lawsuit, you have somebody died, right? Like something bad happened.
Yeah.
So it's never like, I think that's one of the hard things about insurance is it's not like a feel good thing, I was talking to a realtor and they're like, I love like helping people into their first home. I'm like, that's so awesome. Like you get to experience something that's fun.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We like, I saved you some money or I got you some better coverage.
Yeah.
And then that's not like super exciting. And then when something bad happens, like, I feel like that's when we shine. We rebuild your house that burned down. We wrote a check for $1 million after a guy passed away to take care of his family. Like those sort of things, like you feel rewarding, but it's like, but it was a crappy day.
Yeah. Yep.